appreciate you being here, and we look forward to a great discussion and exchange of ideas. Today's event is put on by a collaboration of environmental entrepreneurs, E2, New Yorkers for Clean Power, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and where I work, the Alliance for Clean Energy New York, or ACE New York. And the team that organizes this event is made up of not just longtime colleagues and climate warriors, but also friends. So a sincere thank you to Mel, especially, and to Uchenna, Betta, Sam, Barry, and Jeff for planning today's discussion. So, with a few stints in New England, I am a lifelong New Yorker, by which I mean a lifelong and proud upstate New Yorker, and one that's very happy to be in New York City this week for the world-class level of policy dialogue on climate change that happens here during Climate Week New York City. This event today is one of many. All are needed, including a climate march that happened this past weekend. The march had amongst its themes one of bringing equity to climate action and having wealthier nations pay more, because more is their fair share when viewed from the perspective of their historical level of emissions. And by their, I mean ours. I firmly believe that as one of the nations responsible for a very significant share of the emissions that is causing climate change, and as a world economic leader, the U.S. has a special responsibility to reduce our own emissions before demanding that other nations do, or at least at the same time we're asking other nations to do. And for many years, and continuing up until today, some folks in power endorse U.S. inaction until nations like India and China act. And I bring this up because during my 20 years of working on environmental issues in Albany, we often hear the very same arguments at the state level, or we used to. New York shouldn't be out front as a climate leader because we cannot alone stop climate change, which of course we can't. Instead, these naysayers say we should wait for federal or better yet, international action. But what is the logical conclusion to that train of thought? Do nothing. Wait for others to leave, keep on burning fossil fuels, and it's not productive, it's not leadership, and it's not the team that I want to be on. So I have this habit of telling my kids that in times of climate change, the best place to be is upstate New York. Hiding around on its water, plants in the way of hurricanes, heat waves faced by more and more of the United States and the world. There was a time this summer, though, when the skies were dark and ominous and the air quality was so bad that anything planned for outside needed to be canceled. And after I drove home from work through these eerie skies and walked into the house, my teenage daughter looked up and without even saying hello said, "Climate change, Mom, even upstate New York isn't safe." But it certainly felt like that this past summer, didn't it? No place could be from unbearable heat, the rare Southern California hurricane, the Canadian wildfires, fires in Europe, and heat waves, even flooding in the desert. And we all know that this is what climate change looks like. So this is what climate change looks like, but what does climate action? To not feel hopeless, but to direct our energy towards solutions. To know that there's a team working for climate action, and I believe this includes all of you in this room in one way or another. Climate Week New York City can help us visualize what climate action looks like by offering us all opportunities to hear new ideas, meet people working on the same issues, or to march in the streets. But I'm also here to tell you that being a New Yorker can also help with that. I say that because New York is striving to take responsibility for our share of climate change pollution and working really hard at doing so. It's a rocky road. There are political challenges, there's economic and affordability challenges, and in today's divided world, even cultural challenges to being out in front of climate action. But there's no denying that New York is out front. My own opinion is that we need to hold our leaders here in New York accountable, hold their feet to the fire to maintain this commitment to climate action. But we also need to recognize and celebrate and raise up what New York is doing and sincerely attempting to do. There were plenty of examples this past legislative session when our governor and our legislature needed a pat on the back for what they were doing, like proposing and ultimately passing legislation requiring that all new construction be all electric, which is hugely important first step. I think they deserve credit for that rather than merely shaking the plan that they were way far out on. Yes, we need to highlight things we still need to get done, like direct sales of electric vehicles or ending the obligation for all New Yorkers to pay for extensions of the gas system because of the outdated so-called 100 quota. But I may be getting ahead of myself. Let's take a step back to set the context for today's discussion. In 2019, New York passed its landmark climate act, still one of the strongest climate laws in the nation. And then in December 2022, the scoping plan was finalized, New York's plan for meeting the mandates of that climate act. The scoping plan has 24 chapters and 445 pages. It includes a wealth of information on the justice and equity aspects of the plan, chapters on the just transition, job impacts of the plan, both positive and negative, and workforce needs, a long analysis of the benefits, and a whole chapter on the public health implications of the plan. In chapter 11, the plan starts to lay out the necessary measures to reduce emissions between now and 2050. And by the time you make it to chapter 24, there will have been 89 separate and distinct actions that the plan recommends. 12 for transportation, 12 for buildings, 10 for electricity, 6 for industrial emissions, 9 for the waste sector, etc. And it is a good thing that the plan is so comprehensive that it focuses on reinvestment in disadvantaged communities as the law requires, pays special attention to jobs impacts, both positive and negative, devotes 23 recommendations to agriculture and forestry, and has pages and pages on the need for a transition of the gas system, although a noticeable lack of timeline in that chapter. These important issues are the meat of New York's plan on climate. For today's program, we chose to focus on two of those topics: economic opportunities, specifically entrepreneurship, and job impacts, specifically workforce issues. I'm excited to hear what today's panelists have to say about these two topics. And by reviewing what is in the climate plan, I wanted to provide a context for why we are discussing. But I do also want to talk to you a bit about the bones of the plan. So out of those 90 different recommendations, there's 43 covering the top sectors of emissions. Sectors you all know: the electricity we use, the buildings we live in, how we travel around, and our waste. And of those, there are 5 measures that are the most important bones of the plan. Without action on these, there's simply nothing to hold our plan together. So that is, we need to, number 1, make buildings, new and old, more efficient and then all electric. Number 2, get electric vehicles of all types on the road. Number 3, build renewable electricity generating projects, wind turbines on land, wind turbines at sea, and solar on rooftops and on land. And invest big in the transmission system to deliver that power at all times and in all places. And number 5, set a legal limit on emissions and make polluters pay for the allowances to emit. So yes, I know boiling down to that short list is my opinion. And others might believe that battery storage or adaptation or planting trees is more important, or wonder why I left out industrial pollution. Waste is a big problem too. And many want to focus exclusively on closing down the gas system and closing gas and oil power plants. But I firmly believe that no matter how much we want that, we simply won't close power plants until there are enough other ways to provide the power that we all use. Similarly, use of the gas system for heating will not end until there's another system for heating in place through electrification or thermal networks. So how are we doing on those bones of the plan? So for buildings, as I mentioned, a huge step forward with the requirement that all new buildings be all electric, and local law 97 for large buildings here in New York City is huge as well. But the remaining work is the tough slog of retrofitting the existing stock of buildings and some really tough policy decisions to get there. And number 2, on electric vehicles, New York followed California's lead and phased out the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. Again, you all know that's huge. But clearly lots more needs to get done to get folks to start buying EVs. And in my opinion, we need a revenue source to offer help for that and incentives. And on the topic of building wind and solar power projects and transmission projects, much of the work that the Alliance for Clean Energy New York focused on is this one. And I could talk about it for hours. Suffice to say, we're at 28% renewable, and we need to get to 70% by 2030 and then beyond So we need to ramp up like crazy. We have both lots of progress, especially in contracting, and big barriers now, unfortunately, especially due to inflation. But perhaps most importantly, we need New Yorkers to support these wind and solar projects in their communities. I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure you've heard it too, I support renewables, but not here, not there, not at this time. And that fear of change, however earnest it might be in some cases, provides the fertile ground for misinformation about renewable energy projects, which is rampant and unfortunately in some places growing. And finally, on number 5 of my bones of the plan, we need to set a legal limit on emissions and make polluters pay for allowances to emit. I argue that the Act requires DC to do this, and it would be a waste to give those allowances for free when we need funds to pay for all of the other things that are in the plan. Hence the need for a cap and invest policy, where a cap is set on emissions, it's gradually ratcheted down over time, and the revenues are reinvested in programs to tackle affordability, reduce emissions in communities that need that investment first. It does not look like DEC will propose that cap and invest program by the end of this year, which in my opinion the Climate Act requires, but it does need to happen soon and hopefully in 2021. So in short, I ask that collectively we not forget that building renewables and transmission, limiting emissions and regulations, providing a source of money, and electrifying all energy uses is the foundation of our efforts to combat climate change.
Cassie Shepherd, and I am the program manager for Venture for Climate Tech here at Second Weeks. So I'm delighted to be a part of this event today and for the opportunity to just highlight some climate tech solutions within the state of New York. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Shannon Bright at E2 for inviting me and my team here today. The rest of her team, of course, and all the incredibly impressive partners here making this event possible. As someone who studied environmental law and policy, I find these conversations to be particularly important in helping our state meet and exceed its climate goals. And really, I'm just so grateful to be up here and to discuss some tangible and available paths in getting there with you all. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the 2 programs that exist under our For Climate Tech portfolio. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll have just a quick snapshot here. So this just gives a quick overview of our 2 programs, being Scale for Climate Tech and Venture for Climate Tech. Both are climate tech program accelerators. And before I go into the distinction between the 2, I do just want to clarify our mission and purpose behind the 2 programs. So the goal for both of these programs is to accelerate market breakthrough technologies across the globe by providing founder-centered programming and support. So with that in mind, our first program on top there for the For Climate Tech portfolio is known as Scale for Climate Tech, which is tailored to later stage companies who are closer to manufacturing readiness. And in a nutshell, this program is there to help innovators bring climate tech products to market, and does so by providing technical support throughout the manufacturing process, so that founders have confidence in their path to market, make fewer mistakes, and are able to scale up production to meet demand. Our second program on the bottom there, and folks that I have joining me today are from Venture for Climate Tech. This is tailored much more towards earlier stage companies, often in the pre-seed stage. And just to give more of an overview of this program, we are a nonprofit global venture studio and accelerator, and we seek out the most promising climate tech innovators from around the world. I believe we received 300 applicants globally this year, and we narrowed it down to the top 20 teams, 3 of which are joined by me today, and we have a couple in the audience as well. And basically we offer them hands-on support until they're ready for their first customers, pilot runs, and investment. We actually will be having our showcase event, which is essentially the capstone for this program. We're in our final phase right now, and though this is a private event and is sold out, unfortunately, I'm happy to share information with folks if they're interested, but basically an opportunity to showcase our current cohort, which will be happening at SOSV's in Bio tomorrow. But yeah, come find me after this if you're interested in information on that. Then we can go to the next slide here. I'll just quickly highlight how our programs cover the state of New York via our partnerships. So our entire For Climate Tech portfolio is supported by and thanks to NYS. and both Scale and Venture are administered by Second News, my company that I work for, and NextCore. Second News's team is based out of NYC, while NextCore is based out of Rochester. And this geographical setup of our partnership is intentional in that we try to cover, support, and have awareness of the entire state. As mentioned, I'm here today representing the Second News side of things, and I live here in good old Brooklyn. For those who are not familiar, Second News is a global impact and innovation company that builds resilient economies, and we aim to serve the communities we work with to address their needs through accelerators, incubators, and hackathons. Some topics we are addressing beyond our climate tech portfolio include health and wellness, and with youth and teens, gender equity and tech, and working with NASA on the SpaceX program. Here in NYC, of course, our focus is on climate hardware solutions, with our suite of programs being under the climate tech portfolio. Okay, so now that I've given a snapshot of how our programs aim to support founders in the climate tech space, I'll zoom out and refocus a bit more on the bigger picture. So why are accelerator programs important, and how can they help New York meet our CLCPA goals? So we see climate tech accelerators as a first step beyond academia in getting these ideas to fruition. By supporting earlier stage companies within the climate tech space, we're able to help get these solutions to the New York market faster and more effectively. For our venture program currently, our cohort is aiming to decarbonize one of 4 key sectors: building, transportation, grid, and/or industry. These solutions we're helping advance under each of these categories can and will directly impact the state of New York's goals to 100% zero emission electricity by 2040, to get New York completely off of fossil fuels by 2050, and to get 40% of state climate and energy funded invested in disproportionately disadvantaged communities by investing our time and support not only on sustainable solutions, but available solutions to all. So after the high-level overview, I'd like to pass the mic over to a few of our esteemed founders who are currently part of our cohort 3 in our Venture for Climate Tech program. I encourage you all to chat with them all after this event. All of their texts are incredibly timely for today, and they're just very impressive people. So first up, we will hear from David Goldstein at Hydronic Shell Technologies, then Daniel Cohen at UCharge, and lastly, Jose Coro at Cobalt Water Global. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Cassie, for that introduction. It really is a pleasure to be here, and just an honor to be able to share my story with you guys today. So, our mission at Hydronic Shell Technologies is decarbonizing buildings. But not just decarbonizing buildings, but actually making lives better for the people who live in those buildings that we're decarbonizing. Now, I'm sure many of you know how big of an issue buildings are when it comes to emissions. So globally, buildings are about 40% of emissions. Here in New York City, buildings are about 70% of emissions. It's obviously a huge priority here. Now, when we talk about buildings, New York City, what comes to mind to you guys? If you could go to the next slide. For me, typically if someone said New York City buildings, what do you think of? Think of big, fancy skyscrapers, modern buildings, or old, beautiful, historic structures, cultural buildings, things like that. But let's see what the data actually shows about New York City buildings. Next slide, please. This is a chart that I love. It shows all the construction in New York City going back basically to 1900 by decade. And there's a couple of really important takeaways from this chart. One is that New York City buildings are really old. So that yellow line, that's 1980. The reason I use 1980 here is that's when the first energy code came into existence. But most of New York was built way before 1980, so before energy codes even existed. And then the other really important takeaway is that most of New York is residential. So the dark blue on the bottom is single family homes and the light blue is multifamily. So, these office buildings and things like that, that's just a sliver of New York City. So really, when you think about buildings in New York City, you should be thinking about old multifamily buildings, if anything. So can you go to the next slide, please? So this is what we should be thinking about. this is really a big part of the problem. Now, so when I kind of got into this space, I was working as a mechanical engineer for about 15 years in the construction industry. And a few years ago is when I started looking at this problem and realized what a huge problem that it actually was. And you really can't appreciate how challenging it is to decarbonize these buildings until you actually try to do it. So after a lot of work that I had done through my job trying to figure this out, I realized three really important things that most people underestimate about this challenge. So one is cost, right? And I think everyone can appreciate, how expensive it is to upgrade, modernize a building like this. But it's not just that, it's more than that. We're asking these buildings to switch from cheap natural gas to expensive electricity. So electricity is about 5 times more expensive per BTU than gas. We're basically telling these buildings, you have to spend all this money to do these upgrades, and you're switching to a more expensive fuel source. So it becomes really hard to actually make these projects pencil out in terms of providing any kind of return on investment. So that's the first problem. The second big problem, maybe the biggest problem, is logistics, because people live in buildings, right? So if we want to actually go in and do this major work, upgrading systems and all that sort of thing, we're talking about sending contractors into people's homes, into their living rooms, into their bedrooms. It's literally almost impossible to do. This is what I learned from the pilot project that I worked on a few years ago. It's incredibly difficult to do any work inside these apartments. And then the third thing that I really don't think people quite understand is the scale at which this has to happen. So for New York City to decarbonize our buildings by 2050 to be net zero, we have to be retrofitting tens of thousands of buildings every single year. It's an incredible pace that we have to do this at. It's an incredible scale. And it's mind-boggling, really, to think about what needs to happen in order to actually meet this goal. So when I was working on this, as I mentioned a few years ago, somehow, I don't know how, but an idea came to me on how we can actually solve this problem better. And so I said, what am I going to do? I can kind of pretend I never had this idea, or I can actually pursue this and actually set off on this crazy journey of actually trying to turn this idea into reality, try to commercialize a new technology. So now, the purpose of this presentation is not to be technical at all, but I'll just to give you a sense, I'll explain to you what this is. So this is kind of representing the heating and cooling system in one of these buildings, fossil fuel boilers, window AC units, super inefficient, and all the energy leaking through an uninsulated building. So the solution that we're developing now, if we can go to the next image, is basically retrofitting these buildings completely from the exterior. So a new insulated shell around the exterior of the building and actually integrating complete new heating, cooling, and ventilation system into that shell. So it solves the problem of being non-invasive, so people can do it without having to work in people's homes. But also in terms of scale, we can do this with prefabricated modular components. So all these components of the shell are made in a super efficient factory. You can install them like Lego pieces on the exterior of the building. So in terms of scale and in terms of reducing costs, it helps address these issues. Okay, next slide, please. I'll move through this really quickly. This is just a little more technical if anyone wants to know what this actually looks like. It's a new central HVAC system. Super efficient, super comfortable heating and cooling and ventilation, and all of that distribution from that central system is distributed within that new shell that's around the building. Next image is just showing what one of these panels looks like. This new kind of HVAC system that's all integrated into the panel. Then the next image is just showing how it actually delivers that conditioning into the apartment, all from the perimeter, from the new shell. Okay, next. So now we're going to look at kind of some of the benefits of this, because, and this is kind of echoing some of the things we've already said, but really it can't just be about electrification. It has to be about efficient electrification. And so what we're doing here is by insulating the building, we're bringing the loads way down. And that's what really makes it possible to then do the electrification. So in this case, the HVAC energy use and emissions are reduced by 90%. But really, we're electrifying it. So once the grid becomes 100% renewable, it'll be 100% reduction. But it's also energy cost savings. So, you know, the energy burden that a lot of these families face, we're actually bringing down the cost significantly by 60%, despite going to more expensive electricity. And then there's the peak demand reduction. So on the utility side of things, when we electrify the city, utilities are concerned about that. You know, what's that going to do to electrical loads? But if we electrify efficiently, we can actually bring down those electrical loads. So that's less distribution upgrades we need to do, less renewable energy we need to install, because we're bringing all those loads down. Next slide, please. And then really, you know, as I mentioned, it's also about improving people's lives in these buildings. You know, these old multifamily buildings, life is, they have problems in those buildings. They've been dealing with neglect, you know, for decades. But now that we have to do these decarbonization retrofits, now is the time to address other issues as well. You know, things like indoor air quality, which is a huge challenge in these buildings. Resiliency, you know, to extreme weather events. You know, all these things. Even just improving the appearance of these buildings. You know, this is a huge opportunity to do all of that in these communities. Next slide, please. And then I'm sort of running out of time, but I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the experience of being a first-time entrepreneur. And you know, when I started, I mentioned I was an engineer, very technical person, knew nothing about startups, nothing about entrepreneurship, raising money, doing R&D, applying for grants, all this stuff, knew nothing. And so my first year was kind of an embarrassment. I had no clue what I was doing. Like, people who I talked to at that time thought I was like totally nuts. But fortunately, it's programs like these accelerators that actually got me kind of on the right path. You know, it's these accelerators, it's almost like a little MBA in a 6-month program. And it's been hugely valuable. And since starting this kind of thing, that's when we really started making progress with this technology. And then incubators, you know, similar benefit. And then I also wanted to talk about funding just for a minute, because that's also a huge challenge, I think, with any startup. But there's kind of this chicken and egg problem where you need money to prove that your technology works, but no one wants to give you money until you've proven it works. So it's this real, you know, challenge there. And especially when you're a hardware startup, and especially when we're talking about big hardware, like I'm talking about, you know, if it's software or something, or, you know, a small widget, you can kind of get over that hurdle. But when you're talking about, you know, big hardware stuff, how are you going to get the money to prove, you know, that technology is going to work? It's really difficult. But thank goodness we have, you know, a program like B4C to help us navigate this process. And so we're making a lot of progress right now. So I think I'll end there. Thank you so much for your attention, and happy to yeah, if there's any questions, yes. Yes, go ahead.
Have you considered incorporating renewables, whether solar PV or solar thermal, into your panels or your roof construction, as this may be?
Yes, I love that question. Absolutely. We're putting this new shell around the building. And, you know, I talk about integrating a lot of heating, cooling, ventilation into it. Where we can do more. To your point, we're putting that shell on the building. That's a perfect time to incorporate solar into it, because you're already installing it. So all the labor and everything to do the installation, that's already there. So the incremental cost to just include some solar panels on that cladding, I think it's a huge opportunity. And then all the wiring for the solar, that can run just like our pipes and our ducts are running within the facade. That wiring can run the facade also. So yeah, it's a huge opportunity.
And passive aspects, you know, I don't know if you're building this to a passive house standard or what you're thinking about, because you're doing your windows and, you know, a new shell and you need very airtight, but there also are, you know, passive heating, cooling opportunities, and we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, there's a lot of hands here.
Great presentation. The similar that concept, in terms of integrating other heating and cooling, technologies such as ground source heat pumps, and instead of using the roof, going into the mechanical roof and allowing more common areas on the roof and more aesthetically pleasing, so is that something you would do as well?
Absolutely. I love that question too. Because that's another huge opportunity, geothermal, and even district thermal networks, you know, as was mentioned earlier, like you can do this great super efficient geothermal network or district thermal network, but then once you get it to the building, how do you distribute it, you know, to everyone? So this is kind of the second half of that equation, how do you actually do distribution? So to the question. Yeah, thank you.
Do you also do biophilic design and green roofs? Is that part of the shell as well?
I'd like it to be. I honestly haven't looked into it at this point, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't be. You know, back to the point about the solar PV, you know, you're putting this new structure around the building, why not add biophilic elements to it and make it green, you know, on the roof? Absolutely, there's opportunity for that.
Is there a place in New York where we could see one of your retrofitted buildings yet or not? Are you not at that stage?
No, so yeah, we're not at that stage yet. We're actually preparing our first pilot project, which will be in Syracuse,
Oh, cool.
but it's not up yet. Yeah.
So you actually already anticipated my question. I work upstate primarily, and so this technology, does it scale down to smaller multifamily buildings nicely?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, so like Syracuse or, I find that the larger multifamily is kind of the hardest nut to crack, but it definitely, you know, once you scale it down, it still works. If you're talking about like really small building, that might not make sense, but once you get to like 6, 8 units, 10 units, you know, it's, at some point it starts to make sense as long as it's not super
Beyond the
small.
1 to 4.
Okay. Well, we could talk about something.
Yeah.
Because those kind of things are perfect for pilots. How am I doing on time? There are more questions. Okay. I see you had your hand up before, so I'll give you a chance. Sorry. Yeah.
Have you given any thought to incorporating thermal energy storage within the panels? Because then you can also use that to participate in grid services like water power plant and actually generate revenue.
Yes, another question. So what we're doing is, we can, you know, we're putting this panel, we could put some thermal storage in there, we could put some phase change material or something in there. But what we're actually doing, and you know, I didn't get too technical in this, but what we're doing is from that outer shell, the way we're heating the building is we're radiating from the outer shell through the uninsulated wall into the building. So what we do by doing that is we're actually heating up the masonry of the building. So we're turning that masonry in effect into thermal storage. So we're heating up that masonry wall. You need, you know, for demand response, you need to shut off the power, or even if it's some kind of emergency, you just lose power. All that heat that's in that masonry will just continue to radiate into the space. And because it's going to be a well insulated building now, the loads are really low. So that heat that's in that wall can maintain comfort for a very extended period of time. Thermal energy storage is a big part of it as well.
You may not realise this to this, but new charge, which I'm down the road, is actually the efficiency room. So that's one of the reasons I don't actually have a presentation. So bear with me. Now, I'm here to talk about electric vehicle charging, electric vehicle charging. So let me ask you, show of hands, how many of you regularly drive a car? Quite a few. How many of those are EVs? Not enough, I would say. So, yeah, if you think about the EV experience right now, there's a couple of different flavors of this. So one example is this: you're on the road, you're on a road trip, you realise that you are running out of charge, you're a little stressed to see that. You know, the questions whirling around your head as you're driving down the highway are, where is the nearest charging station? Even when I find that charging station, are the charges all going to be working? How long am I going to have to wait? None of this makes for a relaxing or very kind of positive experience when you're or perhaps you're like me, so I live in the city, I own an EV, and I spend way too much of my daily life thinking about where I'm going to get charged. This is not the kind of experience that we need in order to promote EVs and to encourage people to buy more of these. Now, Anne was talking about, EV adoption being one of our key objectives that we need to be focused on. I think we all agree with that. And while mandates are obviously very helpful and essential, and while funding, which I think in New York State in particular is pretty inadequate, is also very important. The key thing is, you need to make the experience owning an EV much easier, much more tenable for anybody to get into. So part of that is about financing. EVs tend to be more expensive, and that's something that needs to be addressed. The other part of it is about the ownership, the driving experience. And the two situations I just described to you are what I call charging anxiety. Slightly different from range anxiety, but really it's about thinking about how am I going to get this next charge, and is it going to work? If you go to any charging station within the New York City area, I was at one by JFK the other day, and it was. I'm sure I can't swear up here, but it was a bad show. People were fighting for spaces, half the charges weren't working, even ones that were working were charging now. Third of the road they're supposed to be at. That whole experience was terrible. So a lot of this is to do with the fact that we don't have enough investment in our own infrastructure. We're not able to maintain these charging stations. But it's also to do with the fact that it's chaos. The way that the model that we have for charging stations right now is really based on the old gas station model. You have a bunch of stations in a location, and and then it's kind of free for them. It works with gas stations because nobody's there very long, right? You're there for 2 or 3 minutes when you're filling the car. But when it comes to EVs, it's 20 minutes, it's 45 minutes, and that really changes the paradigm around things. So what you charge is about is a software solution for consumers that will mean that instead of going to these hubs and engaging in the free for all, crossing your fingers and hoping for the best, what you charge, what our smart reservations platform will do, and this can be accessed either through our app or through your favourite mapping app on the phone, or ultimately directly integrated into your car's navigation system. When you need a charge, smart reservations will search locally or wherever you're going to be for available stations, and then it will make a reservation for you. What that means is, if you're on the road and you're heading from, say, New York to Rochester, and you're in the middle of that route, it will know for each of those stations, it will be saying, this is what we anticipate our state of charge is going to be when we get to the station. This is the time we're going to get there. This is the car we're driving that is being driven, and therefore you know every car charges at a different rate, and it's very complicated. But every car charges at a different rate, so we can say to each of these stations, this is exactly how long we're going to need in order to get up to the level of charging. So, do you have a 23-minute slot at this time? And you go around all the stations, you find the one that matches best, and then when you arrive at the station, drive into a slot, plug in, you don't have to do anything else. And if we pull that off, that's a vastly improved scenario for any driver. It also works in the urban environment. It's not just be fast chargers, also something like the curbside level 2 charges that we have. We are trying in many parts of the system to access level 2 charging. That's also very difficult. Most of the curbside charging is off almost all the time. It would be so much better rather than driving up and down streets causing more congestion, even though it isn't. If you just know that I can go to the spot, pull in, plug in, and get around. So that's the kind of our objective, what we're trying to get to. The other part of it is, as well as being better for drivers, is that it's going to be better for people who are running the charges. By that, I mean that there is, even though I was describing the free for all the JFK hub the other day, the fact is the usage of these is pretty uneven. Some hubs are very oversubscribed, some charges are not barely used at all. One of the common complaints you hear from the big charging networks, the Electrify America, EV charge point is about utilization of hardware. There just isn't enough of it right now. And if we're able, over time, to create a kind of critical mass where you're having enough reservation requests, then on the back end, what we're able to do is start stacking those in as efficient a way as possible. so that each charger is going to be optimized, its utilization is going to be maximized as much as possible, which means that the hardware owners have more revenue because their chargers are being used more, and that gives them more incentive to invest in new infrastructure and to maintain the infrastructure that they have. So we're trying to create a kind of virtuous circle which will be better for consumers and better for hardware manufacturers. Oh, sorry, better for the charging operators. One other thing to point out is that what the reservation system also allows us to do is to incentivize the creation of charging stations outside of the hub. So you can have, there is no reason why you can't just have individual charging stations, whether they're level 2 or even fast charging stations, in individual places, because then you can manage the based on the reservation system. You don't need big space where you can have a giant tank of gasoline on the ground. You can just put these wherever you want, and we can incentivize individual small business owners to create install charging stations, which can create revenue for them, as well as to incentivize people to go to their businesses and sort of reduce it that way. But it means that we can democratize the way that charging stations are laid out across the landscape, both in urban and in more rural environments. So that's where we're trying to get. Now, I think I only have a few minutes left, and I can tell you a little bit about my story. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am a native of the Bronx. So I actually qualified. I qualified as a lawyer in England many years ago. I used to wear a wig. After a while, obviously back in the I spent a long time working in various consumer businesses around content and media. The reason I came to the US was because in Europe, and this was in the mid-2000s, in Europe we had these wonderful things called ringtones. And we realized looking across the Atlantic, the new Americans didn't have the benefit of ringtones. So that's what we came to.
Thank you.
For a really glorious period. Since then, I've been involved in other consumer businesses and apps, but really, because of kids and because of just clearly what's going on in the world, I began to take more of an interest in climate issues, and then specifically around EVs. And as I was saying, one of the reasons for founding New Charge is really to solve the problem that I was experiencing, which is how are you going to conveniently ensure that your car can be charged wherever you are. And that's that's a big problem that that we are looking to solve. So, as I said, I'm the baby of the group. We are the least kind of, we're at the earliest stage of the group, but I'd love to talk to any of you afterwards to tell you more about it and get you involved in this. So, with that, I will finish and take any questions.
Well, thank you. So it sounds really important to be the idea of not being able to be completely confident about where you take the EV charge has impacted a lot of people. My question is, here in New York, where we have this bond act, $4.2 billion bond act, which includes over $500 billion for electrifying school buses. And that's an issue that I'm in touch with. And one of the biggest problems we have to implement that is lack of charging stations for only school buses. I'm just wondering if you've given that any thought, or you have a way to solve that problem.
I may need to come back to you on that. As I was saying, I guess I've been extremely selfish in the way that I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about my specific problem, which is a good, it's both a good and bad thing, right? You need to sort of feel that you are solving something that supports you to keep you motivated through all the ups and downs of trying to launch these startups. But in terms of school bus charging stations, I mean, off the top of my head, I would think that this is really a pure investment. This is not something generally, insofar as school buses generally have fixed routes and generally go back to their depots at the end of the day. And so it seems that's the obvious place to be able to have this. Now, in terms of how you make that efficient, right? So we can try and manage the so that it's not every school bus all trying to charge, refill their batteries at exactly the same time in any given day. That's a problem that I think others smarter than me will have to think through. But it seems to me that that is, there is an advantage, at least for school buses, they tend to run fixed routes, you tend to know where they're going to be at any given time. So not really sure that's an answer to your question, but it is another good example of one of the many facets of the charging conundrum.
Thank you. Really interesting construct. It makes you wonder why we're still in the current sort of state of free for all. But what do you see as the biggest hurdles to realize your vision?
So I think the biggest hurdles are going to be, well, think about the steps here. So we need to create the software, we start with an app. And then, so the first hurdle is going to be integrating with charging, so that you can actually, and in many ways, conversations I've had with people, maybe to you it's obvious, to me it feels obvious, this is a sort of smart way to manage this, but there is a lot of pushback. There is this other, I don't know if this is an American thing. There is sometimes a reaction you get is, this is America, I should be free to go turn up at any charge whenever I want to charge. This is, I don't want to make
Sorry.
in the Constitution. So,
one section.
so do a bit of that. I take solace, or I think ultimately you could look at a whole bunch of different apps over the past 20 years, see that we as a society have changed our behaviour to make ourselves much more prone to reservations than we used to be. And by that I mean, for example, Uber, we used to just go out and observe, you go out to the street and hail a cab. So now, even if you want to do that now, you're still making reservations, you're still going through the steps. And the reason we do that is because the app process is only enough, and what you get at the end is worth the extra. People are making way more restaurant reservations than they used to, when you had to phone up and make a reservation, because it's easy to do through an app. And so I think, the challenge, the key challenge I really think is going to be on my part, to make an experience that is user-friendly enough, that is effective enough, that people are actually going to want to use it. I think once you do that, you'll be able to kind of convert enough people, begin to demonstrate the benefits of having this much more smartly managed way of allocating charging.
Will you incorporate public charging local government buildings?
So you mean the ones that are only open to government?
Oh, the ones that are often free for the public to use, and that more and more local governments are starting to install them.
Sure. Well, yeah, we'd love to include every child. So the, and I think those are generally level 2 charges. Those would be, it's the same problem, right? You're just going to be there for one if you're in charge of that. Still, it would be advantageous for you as a driver to know that when you shout, you can get a charge. So yes, we would love to. Anybody that runs a charger, we would love to. So thank you all for your time, and
Thank the organizers for putting on this great event. Also, a big thank you to Cassie and Venture for Climate Tech team for recruiting us to be part of it. Today we'll be talking about how entrepreneurship can help address the climate crisis and in New York's Climate Act. But first, next slide, please. I want to tell you about nitrous oxide, or N2O. It is a potent greenhouse gas, 300 times more potent than CO2, which is the equivalent of the mass of Jupiter compared to Earth. Next slide. N2O emissions from wastewater treatment can be traced to every human on the planet. It results from wastewater treatment treating our urine. Next slide. So as we flush our toilets and send urine to the wastewater treatment plants with other things, N2O can be emitted as part of the treatment process. And in cities like New York, it can make up to 10% of the city government emissions. And overall can make up 80% of the wastewater treatment plant emissions. So as an environmental engineer, when I found out we were designing treatment plants that as a byproduct are producing N2O, I knew we couldn't be environmental engineers if we were treating one environmental problem by creating another. So I became the top wastewater N2O expert in water practice and wanted to bring this knowledge back and started up the company. Next slide. So we built the all-in-one N2O solution to help water utilities account for, reduce, and monitor their wastewater N2O emissions. It uses knowledge-based AI to essentially mimic the reasoning process that an expert would follow, looking at data and deciding whether you have risk of N2O emissions, what you need to do to eliminate the risk and reduce the emissions. It also uses machine learning to predict what these N2O emissions are using the data that's already being collected. Because continuously measuring N2O physically is very expensive and a big pain. Next slide. So we're working across the EU, UK, and Australia, 14 paying customers, and have achieved up to a 90% reduction of N2O. So this is how we can really help make a difference and help reach the New York Climate Act's goals of greenhouse gas reduction. But we won't be satisfied until we're doing this in our backyard here in New York City and in New York State. And that was one of the main reasons why we pursued the Venture Climate Tech Accelerator opportunity. Next slide. So in terms of our overall impact and total addressable market, we're looking at 89 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year being the total addressable market. In terms of what we have targeted to go after, we're looking at 44 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year. So this is the number that we need to reach before I retire. Next slide, please. And in terms of impact on New York State, we have 18 million people being served by 509 wastewater treatment plants, which equates to 600,000 tons of CO2 equivalents per year. So this is what we can target. Next slide. And just to give a sense of scale, so if we wanted to plant trees to offset the N2O emissions from the 14 wastewater treatment plants here in New York City, we'd be looking at having to plant over 10 Central Parks worth of trees to offset those emissions. It's hard enough to put in one stadium in the city, let alone 10 more Central Parks. Next slide. And in terms of social impact, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation came up with this value of carbon to quantify the social impacts of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it has rated N2O at $42,000 per ton of CO2 equivalents compared to just 121 for CO2. So what we're talking about, reducing N2O from wastewater treatment plants in the state of New York, we're looking at a social cost of $25 billion per year. That's 25 billion. This is a game-changing number. And this is basically what this is saying is that every municipality in New York needs to be starting with N2O and reducing N2O from our wastewater treatment plants if we really want to make progress. Next slide. And in terms of environmental justice, the good thing is that inherently a lot of our wastewater treatment plants are already serving disadvantaged communities. But what's important is that we actually do something to reduce our N2O because these are communities that normally feel the impacts of climate change the most. So it's important that, yes, we do something to reduce our emissions, but the good thing is that we can also do it in areas that are disadvantaged. Next slide. And in terms of entrepreneurship, we look at our journey, this was something that I realized as an environmental engineer that needed to change. And as a similar story with David, as an environmental engineer, I have no experience in starting up a business, raising money, but that is what these accelerators are for, and what venture climate tech has really been helpful for, and also connecting us to the climate world with their world-class network and world-class programming. So if you have an idea, this is really where you want to grow this idea is through accelerators. But you can also be like Daniel, where you do have experience, business experience, and now have come to realize that you can apply that to make an impact in helping to address the climate crisis. So either way, if you come up with an idea, you can start now and start with these accelerators to really make it grow. Next slide. And the good thing is that a lot of people have a role to play in solving the climate crisis. It's startups, it's corporations, it's government. But the important thing is that we put these pieces of the puzzle together to solve the climate crisis. And the good thing is that we can do this now. And thinking back to a quote from the great Muhammad Ali that I recently came across that really resonated with me because I thought it totally relates to what we're doing with the climate crisis. And I'll paraphrase, but what he said was whether you win or lose in the ring is not determined in the ring. It's determined long before the fight and the lead up to the fight and what you do to prepare for it. So it's the same with climate crisis. Whether we win or lose or solve the climate crisis, it's not going to be in the future. It's now. So now is the time to take action. And we can do that with N2O. So please connect with us and work with us to help secure a better future together. Thanks.
So if you have a sewage treatment plant in your town and want to take advantage of this, what do you do?
So we first get in contact with the process engineers and the operators, understand what data they have available. And the good thing about the platform is it's flexible. We can work with whatever data is available and find ways to use different tools to fill in the gaps. But essentially, there's no reason why we can't get to reducing the N2O emissions regardless of what your data management is. Yes.
So it sounds like you're coming to tax, help them detect whether they're at risk for emissions. How does the emission reduction actually happen? What's the process actually used?
Yeah, so once we know what's contributing to the risk, because we can look at various risk factors that are directly linked to operational parameters. And this is just based on the research and the knowledge behind the different operating conditions that result in N2O emissions. So if we know which operating parameters are contributing to the risk, we know which ones need to be adjusted. So the platform actually makes recommendations in terms of which adjustments are needed.
Myself, my name is Gina Bright. I'm the Northeast advocate for E2. E2 stands for Environmental Entrepreneurs. We advocate for environmental policy from an economic perspective. So a strong, healthy, thriving economy relies on a healthy, thriving environment. And that's where we're coming from and bringing that to the environmental policy landscape. So we really talk about jobs, business opportunity, and the opportunity to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to sort of thrive through economic benefits, including cost savings. So this is part of what the clean economy is jobs and business opportunity, but it can also be so much bigger, the clean economy, such as a regenerative economy, one that revitalizes communities, and one that that makes sure that we give everybody the opportunity to thrive. So that's what we're really here to talk about today. It is possible. How do we get there? Jobs, career pathways, workforce development is part of how we unlock this thriving vision of the future. So I want to introduce our panel with our bios, and then we will, I'll do a little level setting of what the current state of the clean economy is in New York, and then we jump. So we have Carter Strickland, right there, Chief Sustainability Officer and Executive Director of Climate Action at the State University of New York, SUNY. Carter has worked on environmental issues in several capacities as a prosecuting attorney for the New York State Attorney General's Office, water and air pollution expert for New York City's first sustainability plan, commissioner of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and regional water and sustainability lead for the National Architecture and Environmental Engineering HDR. Oh, and I should say, prior to joining SUNY, Carter served as VP Mid-Atlantic Region and New York State Director at the Trust for Public Land, where he led teams to protect open space and build parks and playgrounds across New York State. Charles Halliday, right here, Director of Workforce Development at WEAC for Environmental Justice. Charles is a resident of West Harlem as Director of the Workforce Development and head of the Green Institute at WEAC. Charles taps into his many years of working with and leading empowerment programs throughout Harlem. At WEAC, he has recruited and trained over 2,000 people in 30 hours of OSHA and 32 hours of asbestos handling classes for the construction industry, along with more than 100 in solar installation certification classes. As a result of this, more than 200 now have jobs, including 168 community members working in the construction field and 98 working in the solar industry. Tanya Gale, Executive Director of Green City Force. Prior to becoming Executive Director, Tanya led Green City Force's development team. She is a board member of the core network focused on national service and Environmental Advocates of New York focused on environmental justice. Prior to joining Green City Force, Tanya served in public-private partnerships at the New York City Housing Authority, NYS, and the sponsors for Educational Opportunity Career Program. She has spent most of her career in nonprofit organizations focused on economic justice and young people. Vincent Albanese, Executive Director, New York State Labor's Political Action Fund, Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Ryan Knapp. Vincent has worked as a laborer for 10 years before transitioning into policy and public affairs with the Laborers International Union of North America, which is what Ryan stands for. In 2000, he proudly received his union book and worked on various projects in New York City, in the New York City area. In 2011, he joined the New York State Laborers as a field coordinator and then as a lobbyist in 2014, helping to advance critical legislation and advocating for safe middle-class careers for construction workers. In his current role, he engages in lobbying, public relations, and strategic campaigns for the laborers. Most recently, Vincent has focused on a variety of energy advocacy issues, from reforming the New York State Article 10 process for wind and solar to pushing for an expansion of port infrastructure to support offshore development. Very important. And was also a member of the Just Transition Working Group, which he and talked a little bit about what we're going to talk a little more about today. He has a 5-year-old son named Bronco and a 3-year-old son named Sebastian. He's also a graduate of the University of Scranton class of 2005. I'm excited to be an expert here today. So I want to start us off by sort of level setting. We do one of the things that we look at as, you know, an economic benefit of the clean energy economy is jobs. And we do a report every year, Clean Jobs America, we just released last week. It's showing that across the country, 3.3 million Americans already work in energy. It also shows for New York, we're going to be releasing our New York State report here this week. And it shows that New York is number 3 in the nation for clean energy jobs. Half of all of New York's jobs in energy are in clean energy. 95% of the new jobs in the energy sector were in clean energy. Many of these jobs are in construction, manufacturing, and professional services. Those are the things that we're going to talk about today. And our E2 jobs numbers haven't even taken the Inflation Reduction Act into consideration yet. So, on top of that, the Just Transition Working Group has said we're going to be exponentially seeing a growth from all of the climate actions that New York is leading on and taking right now. So our first question for our panel is, what are these jobs? What is a clean economy job to you? And why don't you just start down the line? Oh, you should have a mic. Yeah.
Okay. Mike, good morning, everyone. This is such an important topic. I look forward to that report. I mean, I think one thing that we have to think about is that a lot of the data we have, and paperless these days, is, you know, the comptroller did a report a year and a half ago that's kind of the latest and greatest and sort of did those figures are from pre-COVID, you know, era. They kind of stopped for a few years. So a lot's happened in between one team and the industry. I think it's important. Another sort of interesting throwback to me is that in a decade we have officially the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's more than a decade old. That effort at the federal level stopped in 2012 because of the federal shutdown. You know, there's been a lot of time to revive it since, but I think we can have a common sense jobs. One is, you know, really anything that is related to these flows of money that are going to be reducing pollution broadly. So that I think that's just on the circular economy, recycling stuff, in addition, of course, to renewable energy and getting buildings ready. I think I'll talk a little bit later about the large number of jobs on the demand side in buildings and vehicles for
I guess for us, you know, we in the laborers union world, we try to refer to clean jobs. We actually prefer the term sustainable jobs. Because obviously it's twofold, right? There's sustainability that what the actual job is creating as far as energy, but also is that job a sustainable job for the workers that are being employed there, right? Is that a sustainable wage? Is there benefits? Because one thing that we've seen, and I think New York, we've been fairly lucky at this because we have some really positive laws on the books and things that are going to continue to kick in, and then some other stuff from the IRA that should facilitate that these really are good jobs. But there still is a lot of there are a lot of bad jobs in the clean economy, right? You see tremendous amount of exploitation in industries like rooftop solar, residential rooftop solar. Right? You see undocumented workers constantly exploited there, you know, low pay, low wages. So look, there are spots in this economy as it emerges that still maybe don't have either the economics are complicated still, for you know how those jobs are financed and paid for, and that trickles down to the workers. But then there also are really a lot of positive steps and a lot of positive jobs that are what we would consider sustainable.
Great, I'm glad you brought that up. So agree totally. But generally for us, training jobs or any kind of opportunity towards a career track, a starting entry point into a path toward jobs that are tied to anything that's around transforming the city to be a smarter, cleaner, healthier city, the investments that are coming in. And you know, examples, as we say, over time, ideally, over time, most jobs will be green jobs, right? Because like we're talking about the path towards wind, everyone's like talking about wind in the future. You know, there was an article a while ago that said like if you want to work in wind, then become an electrician. So connecting the dots between how any sort of skill, trade, technical expertise leads towards the transformation, a clean transition and a just transition to us.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, I agree with everything. But you know, when I think about these jobs, I really focus on the disadvantaged community. All right, right? Traditionally, different community hasn't been able to get into unions. How are we gonna make that happen, right? How do we look at those communities and making sure that we pick the best and the brightest to be in those unions or have an opportunity to work in the job industry? Reason why probably solar is probably the field where people haven't figured out yet because it doesn't have it, right? And I would love to see a DC side of solar and let the electricians do the AC side, right? So that we could have a brotherhood in the DC side and the electricians doing the AC side. That's what I like to see, right? So that way people in communities like, different communities can actually be a part of that. Because traditionally, when I look at certain jobs, I don't see the unions always allowing people of color to get into those places. So I just want to echo that.
And, so we're looking at, variety of jobs that exist today. We're looking at some jobs that might be projected for the future. So what is each one of your organizations doing to sort of prepare people, not just for their current jobs, but also thinking about jobs in the future? And I mean, we're thinking about solar, we're thinking about roofers, we're thinking about electricians, we're thinking about solar software developers, we're thinking about a lot of different types of jobs that a part of the sustainable, I'm gonna go with that, sustainable economy. So what is each of your organizations doing to prepare the current and future workers for these sustainable economy jobs? Those that we're seeing today, those that we're seeing in the pipeline. And can you talk a little bit more, because Vincent, you touched on this a little bit, but about the salaries, the education requirements for getting into these jobs, and maybe even some of like the work environments, because it seems like it varies. So maybe we'll start here and go that way, unless you don't want to. But okay.
So what are we doing? So we're training people, right? Everyone needs to get trained. And unfortunately, I think that the training is really good at this point in time, but I think we need to go deeper and getting more hands-on training, right? And a lot of us are teaching theory because it's the easiest way to go, because that's what takes place. You can put in the class, but you can do it online. But we need more hands-on training because it's necessary. I'm a part of a solar company called Sun Solar Townhouse Services, right? We actually train a lot of people, but once we get them into the field, it takes another 6 months to get people up and running to really understand what the job is, right? And a small company like Solar Townhouse Services don't have that capital, right, to get people up. So we're surviving, but it takes a lot to make that happen. And I think continuous training, heat pump training is another thing that needs to happen. We know that that's coming down the pipe. We just need to make sure that those trainings becomes a little more hands-on and that companies can hire them. And companies can let us know what they need to be trained in, right? Because I think that it becomes a partnership, public-private partnership that we'll all talk about. Where's that happening? And then I just want to make sure that those things take place.
Sure. So at Great City Force, we train young leaders to power a green and inclusive economy through service. So what that means practically is we are a nonprofit AmeriCorps workforce training program. We focus in low income, primarily NYS communities, and we recruit 18 to 24-year-old young adults who may or may not have any kind of understanding or concern or priority around environmental issues, because they're dealing with other very critical life issues. And so our work is around building connection for young people to understand why they are the future and why it matters for them to understand and learn and be trained to contribute to a greener future. So practically, that means we expose them to the first phases of sustainability and environmental justice, which affects their lives daily, and connecting those dots. We have a new group that just started last week. I asked them how many of them were interested in clean energy and sustainability, and a few raised their hands, and then I started talking about asthma and trucks coming through their neighborhoods, and obesity rates, and health disparities, and the reality of the heat in the communities they come from. And then they were motivated to think about why it mattered to be the drivers of change that are tied to jobs. So what we're doing is two things. We're building awareness and ideally building power with a platform for people from communities hardest hit to be skilled and competitive for opportunities, not only to get jobs, but design the needs of transformation. And so that starts with the first exposure, but ideally, the point is working with employers and being aware of policy and elected decisions about the future so we can get ahead of making sure, especially in New York State, this all of this CLCPA and transition work, making sure that the people who are hardest hit are competitive in the future for those opportunities is a priority of what we're doing.
Wow, for us, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of things that we're trying to do right now. I mean, so the first thing is, LIUNA has over 40,000 members in the state, from Buffalo to Long Island. That's broken up into 22 local unions. And then we have 14 training facilities across the state. So one of the major challenges we've had is to not just revamp some of those training facilities to have things like some more geothermal type training, that similar pipe fusion to what's actually going on the natural gas side, but also obviously in solar and wind. And so revamping, some of this is just nuts and bolts, putting actual training equipment in these facilities so that the new members or existing members that are coming in can actually have a real setup to train on, right? The solar rig, doing the racking system, etc. So number one, getting those actual pieces in the facilities. Number two, making sure there's some uniformity across the state for us, right? So these are all individually operated training facilities. Making sure that they have, if you may be working in, outside of Rochester, but then maybe you're on a project where maybe the Buffalo, the local union there is working on another project for that same developer. Well, we want to make sure that those workers, whichever union they're coming from, whichever local, they have the same training. But then there's another part to that, which is us identifying where in the state, while we need uniformity, we also need to recognize that clean energy jobs or sustainable jobs are going to be different depending on where they are geographically. So New York City, for instance, we've focused a lot on, again, there's confusion about what trade is what, and especially what a laborer is. I mean, people hear New York City laborers think Department of Labor or not. Laborers do a variety of different tasks, but it's not as simple as like an electrician or a carpenter, where everyone knows what that is. But one of the things that we focused on, let's say in New York City, is EV training, right? EV station training, right? Because we're not going to build 200 megawatt solar farms in Brooklyn. We don't have the space. So what are those jobs going to be? It's going to be in transmission. It's going to be in some retrofitting stuff. It's going to be an EV charger installation where, laborers maybe that typically do street excavation, utility excavation, now would be, chopping up those sidewalks and putting them back in those streets, repaving those roads to put in those, EV stations, EV charging stations. So the training has to be different depending on where we are geographically. And then I would say the final challenge that we have is making sure that we are connecting the most underserved population that we're through a variety of different programs. We've started existing pre-apprenticeship programs, our partnerships with community groups all over the state to make sure that, just the reality is many of these jobs are in, at least when we talk about the generation side, are going to be in more rural areas, right? They just need the actual space to actually build these jobs. However, most of our disadvantaged communities or underserved population are going to be in more urban areas that don't maybe have the same access to, again, putting 200 people on a 100 megawatt solar farm, right? That's not going to be here in Brooklyn. So one of the things that we've tried to do, and I'll probably touch on it a little bit later, program we did with the developer EDF through a big grant that they gave us, in conjunction with this group of many of you may know them, CEO, Center for Employment Opportunities, all across the state. We started this solar boot camp in Buffalo. And one of the major challenges that we've had in preparing for these jobs and finding a new workforce that wants to come in and build them is there's a tremendous lack of wraparound services for, let's say you live in Rochester, you want to work on this, we interview you, we find you on social media, job fair, etc. But you say, look, I don't have a car, I don't have transportation to go an hour to work outside of Rochester to drive to this solar farm every day. I don't have money for childcare, I don't have, and so I can jump in your apprenticeship program. One of the beauties of a union apprenticeship program is as soon as you get in that program, you're getting paid while you're working. So you're learning and getting paid at the same time because you're on a job and you're taking classes at night or, sporadically throughout your program. This thing that we did out in Buffalo, actually through the grant, it's $100,000 grant, it's gonna last about 5 years, gave money directly to folks that were coming into this solar boot camp we were calling. It was a 4-week program, and then directly from there, we go into the apprenticeship program. Every worker that was coming into that program received a $500 stipend for those first 4 weeks of that program to use on childcare, transportation, etc. So, look, that doesn't solve all the problems. It's something we have certainly talked to our state representatives about, is that if we don't solve that problem, we're not gonna solve the workforce shortage. We have to recognize that these wraparound services are the major hindrance to connecting this traditionally disadvantaged communities to where a lot of the generation projects are.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, SUNY sees very much green workforce training as there's and the chancellor who's new but well known in educational field has laid out 4 pillars, 2 of which are directly relevant. They all are. One is economic mobility. Very proud of the role that SUNY plays. We've been with Buffalo State out of 1,500 schools. There are 3 in terms of number 3 in terms of accelerating economic mobility. We want to do that for all of our students. The other one is just from the student experience is applied learning, and so that relates to apprenticeship programs, giving credit for the learned experience folks coming in. We have in our system now 350,000 students across 64 schools, but those are just students who are in degree programs. There's another 1 million that we train for certificate and other programs throughout the year. In the degree programs, I would say of that big number, don't get too excited because there's about 10,000 students who are in what we call broadly environmental programs that needs to be higher, in my opinion. And I do wonder, and maybe we'll get into it, whether some of the decrease and really has to green jobs have recovered from COVID and at a faster rate than other jobs. But we're lagging a little bit. I do worry that it's because some of those jobs have not materialized. We definitely need, and I know the Canadian side to agree with me, we need those federal and state dollars to flow out from the Bond Act, and IRA, and others to make this industry happen. Quickly though, of those students, it runs the gamut. So it's PhD students are going to be the next generation of battery researchers at Pennsylvania or atmospheric science, just like Albany, through our technical schools, next generation of engineers, a 4-year comprehensive colleges, which are going to be next generation policymakers, perhaps, and lawmakers, to our community colleges, which really are responsive to the needs of local industries. I think about a place like Hudson Valley Community College that is working on a welding program for electric turbines that's going on, or a place like Sutton County Community College, which is using investments in geothermal to educate in building systems generally to run a new workforce training center that is focused on using the guts of the building that are literally exposed to train the next generation of HVAC technicians and green rooms. The industry needs, and so in a way it's full circle.
We are going to touch on that question next, and I want to remind the audience that you can write down your questions. We're going to try to leave some time at the end for a few questions. Folks online, you can also put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get them up here to the stage. Oh, and also, you all saw a postcard on your chairs. Make sure to, if you fill it out, which we hope you will, that you make sure to drop it off with somebody in the back. Lisa Markle right there in green will grab them. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like at the end here. So, our next question is really about the demand that Carter was just mentioning. So what is the demand for these jobs? So once people get trained, like first, do people want new skills? So I'm thinking about like HVAC contractors installing like a heat pump, right? Like, do people want these new skills? Like when you are upskilling people, are people like, yes, that is a skill that I want. And then once people are trained, is there a job for them? And I'm thinking about, I mean, like you said, the paint jobs, you know, can run the gamut. We could be talking about zero emission vehicle charging or installing heat pumps in a building. We could be talking about a variety of things, but are there jobs for people after they go through your training programs? And then also, are people aware of these new skills that they can attain that are going to help their bottom line for their business, basically? And I don't have an order necessarily, but does anybody want to start?
Sir.
All right, yeah, okay, so there's a couple of things there. Look, there's obviously a huge demand for this. For instance, we have a solar project, a grid scale solar project going on right now. The general contractor had said, we needed to ramp up just on laborers alone in this project of City, New York, about 100 laborers they needed. They just called us last week and said, we need an additional 60 workers, right? Like within the next couple of weeks. This is in a more remote area, right? So look, we got it, and you know, we constantly have lists of people from job fairs and things that we're constantly trying to wrestle with that, right? There's tremendous demand, and it's only, you know, there were a lot of delays that happened, whether it be the anti-circumvention tariff issue that happened, kind of delayed a lot of these solar jobs. From going. There's a lot of reasons why jobs are slow to begin, but they're starting now, particularly the grid scale stuff from the distributed side. So demand is there. One challenge, and I respectfully disagree with Charles with this, I think someone who worked in solar in the construction, they're not a solar technicians. I think we have to think about that individual that works on a solar project as an actual construction. Because, like I mentioned that program before, when you come into the laborers, let's say through a solar boot camp or a pre-apprenticeship program that brings in, you know, specifically to work on a renewable project, that project is going to end at some point. And if you want to have a job where there's going to be continued job opportunities for you, one of the beauties of being in a trade union of laborers is you may be working on a solar job, you know, this 9 months. But when that job ends, until maybe the next solar job happens, you might have an opportunity to work on a road job. Right? I mean, we are trying to use this opportunity, whether it be through the IRA or bipartisan infrastructure bill, a ton of money is coming in, right? That's creating opportunities. If we can use as an entry point some of these renewable opportunities, if we want to make sure that there isn't this lull of work on a job for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and then now you're only a solar installer, and now you're out of work until the next solar job comes to your area. Well, we need to make sure that we're using this opportunity to cross-train people broader, you know, have more skills, right? And so that's one of the things that we're doing. And you know, we did run into this issue actually up in the North Country just recently. A developer got a contractor left the job, they kind of screwed it up, and the developer kind of just took over to self-perform this work. Said we need a bunch of people to come in and work on the solar project. We brought in some new members, had them trained up, got right to work on the solar job. That solar job ended, right? It was towards the end of the job. A few of those workers, a bunch of those workers that we brought in, which they were full-fledged union members, we sent them out when that job ended and sent them out to road jobs and some other job. And a few of them said, this is not for me. I mean, some of them quit right before lunch, right? I mean, these are tough jobs, right? You know, so making sure that we have that cross-training and that we know that job opportunities may start with a solar or wind job or transmission job, but that they are continuing to put people in a pipeline that's going to create, again, sustainable.
So, yes, I agree that solar jobs are somewhat construction jobs, because you need a lot of skills to do solar, right? You need construction skills, you need electrical skills, you need, you know, those are the two major skills that you need to have when you do solar, because if you're doing electricity, number one, you're putting sleepers on the roof, you gotta build into roof, you gotta build holes, so you gotta design all that. But what I would like to say is that I just got 98 people hired in the solar industry, and because they weren't a part of a union. I'm not trying to find anything new, I'm not saying that, but the reason what I'm saying is that these opportunities are coming to us because it's not only a union, right? People are hired solar workers because, okay, you can install solar. Is there a learning curve? Absolutely, there's a huge learning curve that we don't have in my area where we don't have a peer apprenticeship program, which I would love to actually think about building a peer apprenticeship program, but I don't have that kind of funding, right? So I did the best of what I know how to do, right? Create it, right? Build a solar cooperative. Those guys in the field, learn how to work. Yes, I understand there's a huge demand, right? I understand there's huge demand. I have ability to call up 100 people to put them on a job? Maybe not, but I do have the ability to call up 2 or 3 crews that have worked for me in the past, put solar on top of the building. You know, we've actually installed 14 megawatts of solar in the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, right? My crews went out there in upstate New York. No, there wasn't a union. They didn't call it. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we need to actually look at the DC side of solar, right, and the AC side of solar, and see if we can match that together so that way we can work together. Because traditionally, as we all know, sitting in this room, disadvantaged communities have not been a part of the union scale. And I would love them to be a part of that, but somehow we have to figure that out, how that works. Okay.
So, yeah, I'd love to follow that. So we know that there are lots of jobs out there, and we're prioritizing first and entry level, emerging, growing up. There are about close to 700 graduates that have additional skills. But the bulk of the folks we're placing in positions are entry level. And that only works if you can create incentives to motivate people who want to get that first step to build skills. And similar to that Buffalo pilot, that's our entire challenge constantly. We have a handful, literally, like on my hand, numbers of people, because of their economic reality, able to be trained in a pre-apprentice program without income because of those wraparound realities. I couldn't go for a 6-week training program without income. Certainly the participants in the program can. So cracking that nut between what are the jobs, what is the long-term growth to motivate folks who, again, their reality is like, this is a stipend, this is not motivating to me. If you can show the steps, whether it's a union job or a union-like job, we have people who, through our social enterprise, shadow HVAC and electrical workers on NYCHA rooftops. And similarly, when the weather's bad and the income stops and the job is halted, our folks want to quit. They're not union people. They have no income. They're like, why am I doing this? And so the reality of like identifying the way to truly show a path and motivate folks is what's going to get people to actually pursue the jobs that are out there.
Yeah, I'll just add, that's all great. I'll just add that, broadly speaking, if you look at that early 2022 comptroller's report and the report that I think is maybe coming out this week from Mayor's Office Accountant, which is new to New York City, you know, the new and emerging jobs are great. That's additional jobs. That's, you know, jobs that didn't exist before in a new industry. The bulk of the jobs are going to be either enhanced skills or increased demand for electricians. There's often uses green only, green adjacent, green supporting, or something that's their classification. But they each need different training, you know, requirements. When I talk to you know, our auto tech groups in our community colleges that are trying to train folks to move away from internal combustion engine technology and the kind of approaches to EVs, they need basically electrical line equipment, safety equipment, discharge the batteries and make sure it's safe. You know, plus a lot of other equipment that's brand new. It's very expensive. On you mentioned welding on turbines. They now have these kind of smaller scale ones, so you don't have to be 200 feet in the air when you're first learning to weld. You know, that is all not it's not cheap. And so, you know, to us, having those apprenticeship programs where building something that's out there, you don't have to create, you know, classroom facsimile or something. That's real is an important way. So, depending on that broad range of skills, green only, green adjacent, green supporting, it will lead to different training. And I'll just say, finally, just we like to work with, especially again, as I mentioned, our community colleges work on responsive, with local employers or unions. Having an industry agreed upon set of skills and certification is very critical. And then we can design a curriculum around it, teach that there's consistency, and I don't think that's quite there yet.
In certain areas there is, because there's always code and everything you do, so there is a standard build stuff, right? So there's electrical code, all the solar, there's code for, so the electrical code, just that you want certifications, then that becomes a different situation.
So I want to ask this next question, even though we touched lightly on it, in a few of your answers here. So we're talking about some major growth here in sustainable economy. And New York is certainly leading the way, one of the strongest climate laws in the nation, and then we're trying to implement it right now and trying to get it done. But how, and so we see a significant growth projections here in the economy and also, growth in local jobs. But how do we make sure that this growth is equitable? I want to explicitly ask this question because it needs to be explicitly asked. So how do we make sure this growth is equitable and just for people who are New Yorkers and people who are also transitioning from the fossil fuel economy into the sustainable one? Who wants to start?
So let me touch on the fossil fuel transition stuff. There's a lot of transferable skills. Let's say you worked on natural gas pipelines 10 years ago. Maybe those pipelines were, in doing large amounts of trenching, area grading, right? That's similar work that's happening on a big, large scale solar, right? It's similar skills. You might need a rigging license, or in practice, you're actually rigging up a pipe. Well, you still have to rig up in many scenarios the racking and bolting systems to actually put the solar stuff together, so the panels. So there's lots of transferable skills. Where we see the most transferable is actually in geothermal as far as fossil fuel, right? Because the pipe fusion that was done in fossil fuel jobs is virtually identical to what's used in geothermal, and whether it be in district loop systems or those large scale networks, it's almost the same. So much so that the pipe size is virtually the same, right? So materials and skills, workers already have those skills, right? So that's easily transferable. That's a really good place to transition a lot of workers from fossil fuel jobs. How do we make sure the jobs are equitable? I mean, look, I've been back on a union family my whole life. We know that a union job is an equitable job, right? Because everybody, you all make the same wage, right? You come in as an apprentice, year one, you make this wage, year two, you make this wage. You're a journey person, you make this wage. Everybody's equal, right? So we know that that's equitable. But even having things like prevailing wage protections, when you're a non-union worker, but you're working on a prevailing wage job, you are typically getting, by county, you are getting with that union wage. Even if you are a non-union worker, having prevailing wage protections like we have from a state level, anything over 1 megawatt was passed a year ago, 2 years ago, is now a prevailing wage job. So even if you are a non-union worker working on a 1 megawatt community solar farm, you are getting that union wage. Right? So that we see prevailing wages and prevailing wage protections as also creating equity, union or non-union.
Yeah, and I do want to note, when we're thinking about how we make sure everyone is able to thrive, we are in the middle of a green revolution. So we are at the ground floor. How do we make sure everyone is able to thrive? Charles, please answer that.
So, okay. So here we go. I'm gonna lay it out there because I may not all active. So what's another layout, right? So, the unions are good, right? And I think they have set a standard. But when we talk about the Justice 40, right, because that's the IRA is all about, right? It's 40% of the benefits go to disadvantaged communities, right? So that means that 40% of the dollars should go to disadvantaged communities. That's what that means. That's how I interpret it, right? So how do you make that happen? One, we've got to get those people into the unions and get those people their programs up and running and make sure that happens. But my experience has been this, and when I talk about 40% of the dollars, is that yes, unions have hired people from the disadvantaged community, right? They have them on their books, right? But they don't get the wages, they don't get the jobs, right? I've experienced it. Put the training program together, got people, now I don't talk about any union it is, but it's happened. I put them on the books, next thing you know, they're only working 2 days, 3 days a week. But it looks like they have all these people working on the job because they can actually show in the books that they have work, right? And then my people call me up, Charles, I supposed to do all this training, I'm supposed to get this, I'm supposed to get 40 hours a week, and you're only getting 15 pay, right? How's that work for the people I've trained and encouraged and put them in there, and now I'm not getting that. So I just want to make sure that when we talk about this, is that 40% of the benefits, right, the Justice 40 piece, 40% of the people of disadvantaged communities get to work on these jobs. And we can go to places, I mean, there's a lot of money out there, right? I can put people on buses, and if we need to go to, I mean, it's happened all over this country. People have been bused to work for a week and work at a certain place and then bused home. So if it was upstate New York and it's a 5-hour ride, dude, I can get 10, 20 people on the bus, maybe 40. We go up there, we do the job, they stay up there for the week and they come back down. It's not like they haven't done it before, right? So why don't we not doing that again and making sure that these people in the disadvantaged community, even though they're in an urban area, can work, right? And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of poverty in disadvantaged communities in upstate New York. Syracuse is one of the worst, right? I said that in the article, right? Rochester is another place, right? So all these disadvantaged communities are not working for them, right? And no, I don't know if anyone's happened into that. I don't live there, but I'm pretty sure I'm hearing through the grapevine and that is always not happening. So how do you make that continue to work for communities? Justice 40, that's what it says. 40% of the benefits should go to communities of disadvantaged communities. And that's what I'm trying to figure out how we're gonna make that.
And I also note that the Climate Act has, at least 35% of the benefits for New York's Climate Act have to go to disadvantaged communities with a climate justice working group, which went through a whole analysis for what it means defining a disadvantaged community. So these are things like we were talking about before, New York leading the way. Sonia, do you want to also answer the question?
Yeah, sure. One of the entrepreneurs was talking about multi-family building earlier. The New York City Housing Authority represents half of public housing in the country. It's on the books, 500,000 people. It's a city within a city, it's bigger than Boston, it's bigger than Manhattan. Think about the millions of dollars that are being invested in these disinvested, you talked about volume of jobs. The retrofit of the Housing Authority in New York City is thousands and thousands of jobs. There are opportunities in New York City in concentrated, dense communities with huge climate crisis realities. And if the plan is intentional about legitimately training, like what Charles is doing, and what apprenticeship programs are doing, to make the people from those communities competitive, as opposed to people coming in, reaping those dollars, getting the brand of scale impact, and leaving out the 500,000 people that live there, that's injustice. However, I used to work at the Housing Authority, and I would sit in board meetings with companies bidding for contracts, ESCOs and others, and they would say, we try to get people, but they're not qualified. They didn't really try to hire people. They basically didn't look for qualified candidates. And so to me, equity is about being intentional and belligerent about motivating, exposing, and training either older adults who already work in, like, civil servants in New York City are a large percentage of public housing low income. There are all these people who are out in the world trying to contribute to their own lives and transformation. And if there's not your point, percentage of focus on being equitable means you figure out what is needed to bring people up to scale and be competitive, right? So to me, that is the line. It's not just, oh, we've transformed this place that's in a bad state. It's like we've been designed transition with the inputs and the lived experience and credible knowledge of what it takes to actually be successful. So you're not having people on construction sites or in retrofits, where the people don't even understand why they're there, so they won't open the door. So you can't stop the bolts, you can't fix the faucets. You need to have a confidence in the community that what is happening is actually for the benefit of the community, and you show that by demonstrated examples and inputs before the plan is done from the community about what it takes to be successful.
I just want to, because the simple fact is, people hire who they know. Right? That's what it all comes down to. So if you don't know the people, you don't want to hire them, right? It's kind of like, it's like one of those built-in barriers that we don't know about. So that's why it's important that we have that public-private partnership and these companies coming to these communities, let us know what they need to be trained, people need to be trained on, and making sure they have the confidence in the community-based organization who's going to make sure that these people are ready, right? And then giving them opportunities, right? It comes down to giving them opportunities. And once again, once you're done on the job, it's always going to be that learning curve. And some won't, some will stay, some won't. But you've got to give people opportunity to actually have that opportunity to make sure that they get with an opportunity of a job, a good paying job.
So I want to keep going and I want to ask a couple of audience questions because we're really running short on time here. So let's ask this first audience question. New York State must scale climate education and clean energy far beyond what our existing system is capable of producing. Yet we have no plan in place to create, or a plan in place to create such a plan that involves the many key agencies. So I think this is really focused on how our agencies are working together. The many key agencies, and maybe that says state structures.
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders necessary for this.
I know nothing about this.
How can we together address this? No worries, no worries. I was like, what? How can we address this?
Well, I might disagree with the premise there. I mean, we have to execute on it. We need funding for it, the Doing Bond Act, that just passed by the voters last year ago, 67%. So there's a lot of support for it. Today, you're going to see a report come out from the state agency.
There was just work. It was a plan for workforce development and education, not for retrofitting.
Got it.
That other thing is a problem too, but.
Well, I mean, that's creating demand we're talking about.
Yes.
Investment in those structures, and we need people to do that. Well, I will say, on the green workforce development piece, we keep pursuing it, as you've heard, see that it's very much part of the mission. There is a new office at the State Department of Labor called the Office of Just Energy Transition that is coming up, and he does a lot of money from the U.S. Department of Labor. You know more about it, perhaps. So I think it is coming. But
Oh, no, you're right about that. I mean, what I would say about the coordination, and it's something, I mean, Charles mentioned, if we're gonna have a justice 40 and 40% of that money is gonna go to helping disadvantaged communities or underserved communities. Well, part of that money, and this is something whether it's CERTA, the state DOL, federal DOL, we have all these pockets of money. We have all these objectives. You look at, like CERTA is very committed to the objectives they have of being inclusive of disadvantaged communities on these projects that they approve and cite. But what we are not doing, and you mentioned it before in that the pilot program with CEO and EDF out in Buffalo, we are not putting money sometimes in places that would be most effective. In the unions, we don't need to create new training programs. Right? We already have massive critical infrastructure that we built that we spend millions of dollars a year on. We do millions of hours of training a year. Why are we not using that money? I mean, it sounds good for many of our electeds to say, we're putting money in to create a new training. But why are they not using that money to connect people with services and where that money would be most effective? Like you said, what we're doing out with that pilot program, that solar boot camp, that $500 a week may not seem like a lot of money. It is to a lot of people who have no way they can probably do a 4-week solar boot camp and not get paid. So why are we not using some of that money to connect people to existing programs, whether union or non-union programs, that are already out there? That seems to be the disconnect that some of our agencies, and this is complicated. This is not for lack of will, or it's that we need to connect those dots, whether you're a community group, or whether you're a union, you all need to be kind of advocating that same message. That there are really effective ways to spend this money and less effective ways to spend money. And if we're not using it on the most effective things, then we're gonna continue to see disconnect, and you know, not a true distribution of the equity of these jobs.
So I wanna ask this last question, unless you want to. Okay, so I wanted to ask this last question. The electrician workforce is 95% male and extremely unwelcoming, toxic to women. How, this is just a question, how can we turn this whole industry around? What interventions should we work? So even just like, you know, I mean, the clean energy industry is pretty heavily male if you look across the country, especially. New York is a little bit better than other states, but I mean, there is a gender gap. So how can we, what interventions can actually work to fix this at the necessary scale?
I'm gonna give a 30-second answer, then pass it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Non-traditional employment for women. An amazing organization that is incredibly successful in, again, it's this piece, it's not a small thing, your point, motivating, realistic about what it takes to support people in spaces where they feel safe and guided in a path that is challenging. And that's my best answer. 4,000 more non-traditional employment for women partnerships that they impact into unions, they work with nonprofits, and there needs to be more news in the world.
I just want to say, that was the answer I was gonna give. That's one of the best programs out there, non-traditional employment for women. And look, there are tremendous opportunities. There are more programs like this, and maybe seeing programs like that, again, go back to the dollars, putting money in that. So let's say a non-traditional employment for women program that's based here in New York City, maybe that program can now expand outside of New York City, throughout upstate, right? And place people. And that program is a direct union feeder program. So you are a woman that enters that program, you, by the end of that 16-week program, you are now in whatever trade you've selected. And by the way, I'm not an electrician, so laborers,
I do, before I wrap up with a conclusion, I do wanna give everybody an opportunity. How can people get involved? With you guys, with your organizations, with your programs? And Charles, I don't know if.
Call me.
Yeah.
Solar Town Services, which is the workers cooperative, we're installing, we install 50 megawatts of solar, but every time we turn around, we're hiring new people, and hiring new people takes money, and training new people takes money, so we're always looking for support in that aspect. We need the money. And definitely need some money, and that would be great for us. And then we train, we're looking to move forward in doing some heat pump work, because we can see again, that is another non-union type of job. When you talk to 1-3 family, it's more about construction people, have people design and actually have people doing installing and heat pump. We know that's something that's coming along. So, we're looking down the road and making sure that happens. That'll be done with the solar piece.
Great. So we're about disruption and systemic change, which means you have to collaborate and partner. Very thrilled that we have a long time and emerging stronger partnership with React and all kinds of really exciting projects coming in the years ahead and tomorrow also. And so that's really exciting. We've always been interested in building more traction towards unions, and clearly because our folks are historically at risk, not necessarily traditional academic path. Young people use service learning as a platform. We want to build on skills in partnerships, whether it's community colleges or SUNYs, et cetera. So there are all kinds of partnerships. And so if folks in the audience are thinking creatively about not just one piece, but the big picture, very excited to talk to you about what that could look like in partnership. Resources always, influence always. So at a minimum, follow us on social and reach out if you have some ideas that you think support what initiatives. Thank
I guess I would send you to one website, it's constructionjobsny.org. That is a laborers run website. If you fill out your information, when you go on this website, and you're in New York City, it's gonna like geolocate you and it's gonna give you information, whether it be direct applications to one of those union apprenticeship programs, but also other information about when apprenticeship programs are being held or recruitments are being held. Gonna have access to all those, whether they're renewable adjacent or renewable jobs or just other construction jobs that we do. That's when we do all of our recruiting throughout New York State. So that's constructionjobsny.org. Great place to send people if they're interested in a laborer's union construction career. And also on that site, you'll find like new and some of those career apprenticeship programs. We have some other links on that site to those programs as well, so you can contact them.
Yeah, I would just close out by saying, get in touch with me, I'll take Charles' line. But the city is very much open to partnerships, so it's folks on the stage within green workforce development to the entrepreneurs, we very, very robust and growing sustainability program. We are going to be investing in building, very much want to try out new technology. So, we're open for those pilot sites.
Thank you so much to the whole panel. We have a couple quick flags for everybody before we head up to lunch. So first, we want to thank everybody who partnered on this event. New Yorkers for Clean Power, of course, Association for Energy Affordability, NRDC, and of course, ACE New York, who opened us up here. And like we said, on your chair, you'll see a postcard for New York Heat. We talked a little bit about policy today, and policy is key, a key driver and one of the most powerful tools we have to change. So New York Heat is the Home Energy Affordable Transition Act. And it will make sure that we have the right infrastructure for the clean energy future that we need. So it is absolutely crucial that we get this done. And we'd love for people to make sure that they fill out the postcards, and then for people online, we'll also send some information after we close here. But as we said, policy matters. It's important to get involved in New York Heat, but also in the Clean Energy Careers effort that we did a video a little bit earlier right before this panel. Clean Energy Careers New York, there's a website. Get involved both in policy and in just getting involved in the sustainable workforce that we're working to make sure that we have here in New York and beyond. Thank you so much.